The city was draped in a heavy veil of grief as people gathered to mourn the death of Edward Langston, a billionaire whose wealth was matched only by the icy distance he maintained from everyone around him. His mansion had been the center of countless headlines, yet no one truly knew the man behind the towering empire. Today, at his grand funeral, the crowd of mourners moved slowly, faces solemn and eyes downcast, dressed in black, as though the darkness of their clothing could match the weight of their loss. The towering coffin at the center of the hall seemed almost unreal, polished to a reflective shine that mirrored the sadness of the guests. Whispered conversations floated through the air, a mixture of sorrow, respect, and, for some, a relief that a man so feared in life was gone. Just as the officiant prepared to speak, a sudden commotion broke through the heavy silence. From the back of the hall, a frail, disheveled woman stumbled forward. Her clothes tattered and her hair unkempt, yet her eyes burned with an urgency that demanded attention. "He's not dead," she cried, her voice raw and trembling, echoing off the marble walls. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd, and murmurs of disbelief spread like wildfire. Security personnel immediately stepped forward, their polished shoes clicking against the floor, but the woman held up a small, worn notebook, as if it were a shield and a weapon all at once. Her hands shook, and her voice cracked with emotion as she pleaded, insisting that the truth had to be heard, that Edward Langston was alive, and that the story everyone believed was a lie. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the occasional gasp or whispered question as people turned toward her. Some curious, some outraged, and others unsure if they had witnessed a moment of madness. Eyes darted between her and the coffin, trying to reconcile the undeniable sight of the polished wood and flowers with the certainty in the woman's voice. Journalists raised their cameras, flashes stuttering in anticipation, while a few family members exchanged worried glances, their faces pale and rigid, caught between disbelief and the fear of scandal. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Even the birds outside seemed to hush as if waiting for an answer. Every eye in the hall was fixed on the small, trembling figure, wondering who she was, how she knew this, and whether she held a secret powerful enough to shatter the carefully constructed reality of Edward Langston's life and death. The air was thick with tension, curiosity, and disbelief, and in that moment, the ordinary morning of a billionaire's funeral transformed into the beginning of a mystery that no one in the room would soon forget, leaving everyone questioning what was real and what was imagined. The murmurs of shock from the funeral hall grew louder as the woman, now identified by a few onlookers as Clara, took a shaky step forward and began to speak, her voice trembling yet determined, carrying a weight that demanded to be heard. She told the crowd that she had once known Edward Langston in a way no one else had, a secret connection hidden behind the cold public image of the billionaire. Clara explained that she had not worked for him in the usual sense of a servant or assistant, but rather as someone whose life he had quietly, carefully, and selflessly touched when she was at her absolute lowest. Her past had been one long series of struggles, nights spent in dark alleys, days searching for work that never seemed to appear, and endless moments of despair that had threatened to crush her spirit entirely. Yet, in that darkness, Edward had reached out, though no one else knew it. He had provided her with shelter when she had nowhere else to go, given her meals when hunger gnawed at her, and offered guidance and advice that allowed her to find small steps toward stability and hope. Clara paused, clutching her worn notebook tightly against her chest, and looked around the room at the sea of faces, some incredulous, some curious, some clearly angry at her intrusion. She revealed that after receiving Edward's help, she had tried to keep in contact, hoping to find him again, but life's chaos and distance had kept them apart. Then came the shock, the news she had heard, supposedly confirmed by multiple sources, claimed that Edward had died in a sudden and mysterious accident. The announcement had left her devastated, but instinct told her it could not be true, and she had spent weeks searching for evidence that he was still alive, every step leading her closer to this day in this hall. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, whispers spreading like wildfire, the tension thick enough to touch. Doubts clashed with curiosity, fear with hope, as people struggled to reconcile their mourning with the possibility that everything they believed about Edward Langston's death might be wrong. Clara's eyes glimmered with a mixture of fear and determination, and for a moment, the room fell completely silent. All attention on her and the story she carried, a story of hidden kindness, resilience in the face of suffering, and a mystery that could overturn the finality of grief itself. Each person in the hall felt the uncertainty pressing down on them, the line between reality and rumor blurred, and the air seemed charged with a collective heartbeat of anticipation. It was as if the funeral, meant to mark an ending, had transformed into the threshold of a secret that had the power to shock, to inspire, and to challenge everything the mourners thought they knew, leaving everyone suspended in the uneasy balance between disbelief and the hope that perhaps Clara was telling the truth. Clara's hands trembled as she slowly opened the worn notebook, and all eyes in the crowded funeral hall turned toward her, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Inside were letters, receipts, and neatly folded notes, some yellowed with age, others more recent, each piece telling a story of Edward Langston's quiet attention to her life, far removed from the public perception of his wealth and coldness. She carefully held up the first letter, and the words seemed to hang in the air, revealing Edward's concern for her well-being, his encouragement when she had faltered, and subtle hints about his movements over the years. There were notes about places he had visited, reminders to take care of herself, and even small financial records showing discreet support that no one else had known about. One letter mentioned that he had traveled outside the city for personal reasons and that he needed to remain hidden temporarily, a hint that the news of his death could be part of a plan to protect himself from business rivals and the constant glare of public attention. Clara's voice quivered as she read passages aloud, describing Edward's secret life, his careful avoidance of media scrutiny, and the hidden kindness he had shown her, and possibly others, who had never received recognition. Skepticism still hung over the crowd like a thick fog. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, unwilling to accept that the man they had mourned so heavily could still be alive. But then, a few journalists leaning forward in the front rows began whispering to one another, recognizing the handwriting on the notes as unmistakably Edward's. Their cameras clicked quietly, flashes hidden but ready, as the tone of the hall shifted from mourning to tense curiosity, a tangible energy sparking between the rows of people who now felt that a secret far greater than they had imagined was unfolding. Clara turned another page, revealing a small sketch of a building he had visited and a short message that hinted at future plans she could only guess at, adding another layer of mystery. The whispers grew louder, but now curiosity replaced judgment, and the mourners felt themselves pulled into a story that seemed larger than life itself. Even some family members, who had remained stiff and pale, leaned forward, unable to ignore the possibility that they had misunderstood Edward's intentions all along. Security glanced nervously around, uncertain whether to intervene, while journalists exchanged knowing glances, realizing they were witnessing the kind of revelation that could change public perception forever. The air was thick with suspense as everyone in the room tried to piece together the fragments Clara revealed, each letter and note acting like a puzzle piece that hinted at Edward's survival and the careful planning behind the ruse of his death. In that moment, the grand funeral hall transformed from a place of sorrow into the setting of a mystery, a story of hidden kindness, intrigue, and secrets waiting to be uncovered, leaving every single person suspended between disbelief and a growing anticipation that the truth, finally, was on the verge of being revealed after Clara's revelations at the funeral. The atmosphere was tense and chaotic, Edward Langston's family glared at her with a mix of anger and disbelief, and the funeral organizers fumed over the disruption, worried about the scandal that seemed to be unfolding in front of the city's most powerful eyes. Yet, despite the outrage and whispered arguments, curiosity began to overpower the initial anger. People could not ignore the possibility that Edward might still be alive, and the thought ignited a spark of suspense that ran through the room. Among the crowd, a young investigative journalist named Daniel recognized the magnitude of what Clara had claimed and felt a surge of responsibility to uncover the truth. With determination in his eyes, he approached Clara, offering to help her trace the path of the clues hidden in her worn notebook. Their search began quietly, moving carefully through each hint Edward had left behind, starting with an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, a place that seemed deserted and forgotten, yet held a mysterious note tucked under a loose floorboard, pointing them toward the next location. Daniel and Clara moved with cautious optimism, aware that every step could be a dead end, yet unwilling to give up on the hope of finding Edward alive. Their journey took them to a remote cabin in a dense forest, far from the noise and judgment of the city. The cabin was modest, almost hidden beneath towering trees, and its solitude gave Clara hope that she was getting closer. Inside, they discovered more clues, letters, messages, and objects that suggested Edward had been careful to leave a trail only someone who knew him well could follow. Each piece they uncovered deepened the suspense, as though the billionaire had orchestrated a puzzle designed to be solved only by those with loyalty, trust, and patience. Finally, after days of careful tracing and relentless searching, the clues led them to a private estate on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high walls and lush greenery that made it nearly invisible from the road. As they approached the gates, the air felt charged, every step heavier with anticipation, every sound amplified in their heightened awareness. Clara's determination, fueled by years of hardship and her belief in Edward's true nature, inspired Daniel and even those who had doubted her story from the beginning. They understood that this search was not just about proving Edward was alive. It was about uncovering hidden truths, confronting fear, and reclaiming hope that many had thought lost. The journey had transformed from a simple investigation into a mission of justice, human connection, and closure. With every obstacle they faced, strengthening Clara's resolve, and drawing Daniel into a story far bigger than he had ever imagined. And as they finally reached the towering gates of the estate, a moment of tense silence settled over them, leaving both of them and the reader with a thrilling anticipation of the revelation that awaited just beyond those walls. A revelation that could change everything they thought they knew about Edward Langston, life, and the unexpected ways people touch each other's lives. After a tense and exhausting journey, following the clues in Clara's notebook, she and Daniel finally arrived at the secluded estate, a place hidden behind thick trees and high stone walls that seemed untouched by time or intrusion. The air around them was heavy with anticipation, every step toward the grand but quiet house echoing in the stillness as though the world itself was holding its breath. When they reached the door, it opened slowly to reveal Edward Langston, alive but visibly frail, his once commanding presence softened by illness and time spent in hiding. His eyes, however, still held the sharp intelligence and quiet authority that had defined him in life. And when they met Clara's gaze, a single tear escaped, glimmering in the soft light of the room. Edward explained, his voice gentle yet firm, that he had faked his death to protect what remained of his fortune from ruthless, corporate enemies who sought to exploit his absence, ensuring that his legacy and resources would not fall into the wrong hands. He recounted the months of careful planning, isolation, and vigilance that had kept him hidden, a strategy born not from fear of death, but from a deep desire to safeguard the people and causes he cared about most. Seeing Clara again brought a wave of relief and emotion, as he had silently watched her grow from the struggling, homeless woman he had helped into a strong, independent, and capable individual. Edward revealed that he had always known she would be the one to uncover the truth, to bring his story to light at a moment when it would inspire and create change rather than chaos, trusting her judgment, courage, and compassion to reveal what needed to be revealed. Clara listened, her heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief, joy, and gratitude, as she realized that every step of her search, every moment of struggle, had led her to this reunion, a meeting that was both personal and monumental. Daniel, standing nearby, watched silently, sensing the deep emotional connection between the two and understanding the magnitude of what had unfolded. The room seemed suspended in time, the reunion both heartfelt and cathartic, as old wounds, secrecy, and fear dissolved in the presence of trust, resilience, and human connection. Edward and Clara shared a moment of quiet understanding, communicating more with their eyes and presence than words could express, a testament to the bond forged in hardship and quiet kindness. The suspense of the past days, the uncertainty of Edward's fate, and the tension of their journey all converged in this emotional climax, leaving everyone, Clara, Daniel, and the imagined reader, holding their breath at the power of human determination. The careful orchestration of trust, and the unexpected ways life can reveal hope and redemption when least expected. In that small, secluded room, the weight of secrecy lifted, and the promise of new beginnings and meaningful change hung palpably in the air, marking a turning point in both Clara's and Edward's lives, a moment that would be remembered far beyond the walls of the estate. The revelation that Edward Langston was alive spread through the city, like wildfire, reaching every corner in hours, leaving people stunned, confused, and questioning everything they thought they knew about the billionaire they had mourned so heavily just days before. News outlets ran live updates, footage from the funeral still fresh in everyone's minds, capturing the disbelief of the crowd, Clara's passionate testimony, and the moment Daniel and Clara had found Edward in his secluded estate. Social media exploded with comments, theories, and debates. Some people expressed outrage at the deception, feeling betrayed that Edward had faked his death and that an entire city had been misled, while others marveled at the courage of the woman who had refused to stay silent. The homeless Clara who had walked into a hall of powerful, skeptical people and dared to tell the truth. Articles and televised segments highlighted the surprising humanity behind Edward Langston, painting a picture of a man who, despite his wealth and reputation for coldness, had quietly guided and supported lives in ways the public could never have imagined. Interviews with Clara emphasized her bravery, her unwavering determination to find the truth, and her resilience in the face of hardship, transforming her from an invisible figure of the streets into a symbol of hope, honesty, and moral courage. People who had ignored her presence before now recognized the strength it took to confront powerful figures and public opinion with nothing but a worn notebook and a belief in what was right. Journalists praised the story not only for its shock value, but also for its underlying message about the unexpected ways people can influence each other's lives, the silent acts of kindness that often go unnoticed, and the importance of human connection over wealth, status, or fear. The city buzzed with conversations about forgiveness, redemption, and the mystery of Edward's motives, trying to reconcile the man they had thought they knew with the truth that had been revealed by Clara. Families, business leaders, and ordinary citizens alike found themselves inspired by the tale, discussing how one small act of integrity could ripple through lives in unimaginable ways. Even those who had initially been angry or suspicious began to see the story as a lesson in humility, empathy, and courage. Clara's journey from hardship to prominence, guided by Edward's unseen support and her own determination, captivated the hearts of many, making her a living symbol of resilience and hope. Proof that even the most overlooked individuals can change the course of events and reveal truths that challenge the very foundations of society's assumptions. The media continued to cover every detail, emphasizing the emotional depth of the reunion, the suspense of the search, and the lasting impact of Edward and Clara's story. Turning it into more than just a shocking headline, it became a narrative of life, human kindness, and the extraordinary ways ordinary people can inspire profound change in the world around them. By the end of the day, the city had shifted from shock to reflection, pondering not just the return of a billionaire, but the courage of a woman who refused to be silenced, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed the story unfold. After the shock of Edward Langston being revealed alive, he knew that simply returning to the public eye would not be enough. He wanted to transform his life into something meaningful, something that could truly leave a mark beyond the walls of wealth and power he had spent so many years building. Reflecting on his own survival and the quiet gratitude he felt toward Clara, Edward began planning initiatives that could provide real hope and change for those who had been overlooked or forgotten by society. He decided to fund shelters for the homeless, focusing on places where families, women, and children could find safety and comfort, spaces where they could rebuild their lives with dignity. Education became another cornerstone of his vision, as he provided scholarships, learning centers, and mentorship programs aimed at young people who lacked guidance, giving them the tools to create futures they never thought possible. Edward also started small business initiatives and skill training programs, targeting individuals who had no one to believe in them, offering not just money, but the support and encouragement needed to succeed. Clara, who had been central in revealing his survival and whose own life had been transformed by his earlier acts of kindness, was entrusted with a leadership role in a new initiative specifically designed to help homeless women and children. Her past struggles gave her insight, empathy, and determination that money alone could not provide, making her the perfect person to guide others toward hope and independence. Together, Edward and Clara began visiting shelters, schools, and community centers, witnessing firsthand the impact their efforts had on lives. And each success story, no matter how small, reinforced their mission and gave them renewed purpose. Slowly, word spread that Edward Langston, the billionaire once feared for his coldness and untouchable wealth, was quietly changing the world, acting not for recognition or praise, but out of a deep sense of responsibility and compassion that few had ever imagined possible. The public, still fascinated by the drama of his faked death and Clara's bravery, began to see a new side of Edward, one of humility, generosity, and sincere human connection. He met with city leaders, local organizations, and volunteers, forging partnerships that amplified the reach of his programs. But he remained focused on the people who needed help most, those whose stories often went unheard. Clara's leadership inspired other volunteers, creating a ripple effect of hope and dedication throughout the city, demonstrating that one person's courage, combined with another's resources, could transform countless lives. Edward's redemption was no longer a private journey. It had become a movement, showing the world that wealth could be wielded not for power or prestige, but as a tool for compassion, change, and justice. And as they walked together through the bustling activity of shelters and training centers, Edward and Clara witnessed the proof of their efforts. Children smiling as they learned, families gaining stability, and countless individuals discovering their own strength and potential. The billionaire who had once been a figure of fear was now quietly celebrated as a hero of humanity, leaving the city and all who knew the story with a powerful lesson that even the richest and most misunderstood can touch lives in the deepest, most meaningful ways when they choose kindness over fear. In the weeks following Edward Langston's dramatic return, his family struggled with a storm of emotions that ranged from anger and resentment to confusion and disbelief, unsure whether they could ever trust the man who had vanished and caused so much chaos with his faked death. The initial bitterness ran deep, as years of distance, misunderstandings, and Edward's cold public image had left wounds that felt impossible to heal. Yet, as the family observed the genuine transformations taking place around them, the lives Edward and Clara were touching, the shelters being built, the children learning, and the homeless women finding safety, their hearts began to soften, and curiosity slowly replaced their resentment. Clara, who had endured years of hardship herself, took the first steps toward reconciliation, meeting with family members one by one, sharing not only her story, but also the truth about Edward's motivations, the careful planning behind his disappearance, and the purpose behind the secret acts of kindness that had saved her life. Her words were not accusatory or defensive, but filled with compassion, understanding, and the quiet strength of someone who had experienced suffering, yet refused to let it define her. She forgave the misunderstandings, the coldness, and the initial dismissals, demonstrating that healing was possible when forgiveness guided the heart. Edward's family, initially skeptical, began to see that the chaos of the funeral had not been meaningless disruption, but a lesson in humility, empathy, and second chances. They watched as Clara encouraged them to participate in the charitable initiatives, lending their hands, voices, and influence to projects that were making a tangible difference in the lives of those in need. Slowly, walls of pride and mistrust crumbled, replaced by shared purpose and understanding, as they realized that the true value of wealth lay not in accumulation or power, but in its ability to create opportunities for hope, care, and transformation. Conversations that once would have ended in arguments now turned to collaboration, planning, and reflection on the importance of human connection. Family dinners, long absent of warmth, became filled with laughter, discussion, and a shared commitment to giving back. Edward, once distant and misunderstood, watched this evolution with quiet satisfaction, understanding that the ultimate redemption was not simply in his survival or his financial generosity, but in the mending of relationships that had suffered from neglect and misjudgment. The lessons of the funeral, the chaos, the surprise, the bravery of Claire resonated far beyond the immediate family, reminding everyone involved that acts of unseen kindness could ripple outward, affecting even the hardest hearts and transforming bitterness into understanding. In the end, Edward's family reconciled fully, learning that while money could provide comfort, it could never replace the priceless values of love, trust, and empathy. They embraced Clara not only as a friend and ally, but as a symbol of courage and forgiveness, someone who had bridged the gap between isolation and connection. The city, aware of the story, began to admire not just Edward's charitable actions, but the transformation of a family willing to learn, forgive, and join in the work of spreading hope. The funeral chaos, once a source of scandal and conflict, had evolved into a profound lesson that even the deepest wounds could heal when guided by understanding, compassion, and the willingness to embrace second chances. Clara's life changed in ways she had never imagined, transforming from the fragile, homeless woman who once wandered the streets with nothing but a worn notebook and fading hope, into a strong, respected leader who managed programs that touched hundreds of lives each day. The journey had not been easy, and the memory of cold alleys, hunger, and the harsh judgment of strangers remained etched in her mind, fueling her determination to ensure that no one else would face the same despair alone. Under Edward Langston's guidance and support, Clara took the reins of initiatives that provided shelter, education, and empowerment for the homeless, particularly women and children who, like her, had once felt invisible to society. Every program she oversaw was infused with the empathy she had gained from her own struggles, and she made sure that every individual who walked through the doors felt seen, valued, and capable of rebuilding their lives. Clara's story, once hidden and overlooked, became a beacon of hope as she began speaking publicly at conferences, charity events, and schools, sharing the journey that had carried her from the streets to a position of influence and responsibility. Her words resonated deeply with audiences, many of whom had faced their own hardships, inspiring them to find courage even in moments when life seemed unbearable. People who had once ignored her presence or dismissed her struggles now looked at her with admiration, recognizing in her resilience, integrity, and unwavering spirit a lesson about the power of persistence and the profound impact one determined individual can have on the world around them. Clara's days were filled with visits to shelters, meetings with volunteers, and mentoring sessions where she guided others through challenges she once knew intimately. She never lost sight of her roots, and the memory of every cold night on the streets reminded her why her work mattered so deeply. Her influence grew steadily, not just because of her position, but because of the authenticity, humility, and human warmth she brought to every interaction. Even those accustomed to wealth and privilege were moved by her story, seeing in her example the true meaning of compassion and action beyond mere charity. Clara's presence encouraged collaboration, bridging gaps between the wealthy, the media, and those in need, proving that connection, empathy, and shared purpose could create extraordinary outcomes. Yet, even as she achieved recognition and respect, Clara remained grounded, understanding that her journey was not about personal fame, but about changing lives, giving hope, and showing that no matter how dark a past may be, resilience and courage can illuminate a future full of possibility. Each success, each story of transformation, became a testament to the power of human determination, and as Clara continued to inspire, guide, and lead, she solidified her place not only as a remarkable survivor, but as a symbol of hope, demonstrating that even the most overlooked and forgotten people have the power to change the world. Years had passed since the shocking day when Clara had interrupted Edward Langston's funeral, and the city had long since moved from disbelief to admiration as the extraordinary story unfolded into a legacy that touched countless lives. Edward and Clara had worked tirelessly together, turning their shared vision into a foundation that provided not only financial support, but also guidance, education, and hope to those who had nowhere else to turn. The programs they created were now recognized as some of the most impactful initiatives in the city, reaching thousands of people who had experienced homelessness, neglect, or hardship, giving them the tools and encouragement needed to rebuild their lives with dignity. Clara's journey, from sleeping in alleys to standing alongside a billionaire to create such lasting change, had become a symbol of courage and resilience, demonstrating to the public that determination and compassion could overcome even the harshest circumstances. Edward, once known for his wealth, power, and cold demeanor, had become a quiet hero, admired not for his money, but for his humanity and willingness to use his resources to uplift others. The story of the homeless woman, revealing that the billionaire was alive, had transformed into a timeless tale, retold in news articles, books, and conversations throughout the city, reminding everyone that courage and honesty can spark unimaginable change. On the day of the ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new community center built by the foundation, the atmosphere was electric, filled with excitement, gratitude, and anticipation. Hundreds of people who had benefited from the programs gathered, families and children whose lives had been touched by Clara's leadership and Edward's support, smiling and holding banners, while volunteers and staff prepared the center to welcome its first guests. Clara and Edward stood side by side, holding the golden scissors, a moment that represented not only the opening of a building, but the culmination of years of effort, trust, and dedication. As they cut the ribbon together, the crowd erupted in applause, the sound echoing like a celebration of hope and human connection, rather than wealth or status. Edward glanced at Clara, and they shared a quiet smile, a look that conveyed gratitude, pride, and understanding for all they had endured to reach this point. Speeches followed, but it was the shared glances, the stories of transformation, and the visible impact of their work that resonated most deeply with everyone present. Children laughed and ran through the halls of the new center. Families spoke of second chances, and volunteers felt renewed purpose as they realized the foundation had become more than an organization. It was a movement, a testament to the extraordinary potential of kindness, courage, and determination. The city had learned a powerful lesson. Sometimes chaos, unexpected interruptions, and moments of uncertainty can lead to the most remarkable and lasting transformations, creating ripples of hope that continue to touch lives for generations. In that moment, with the sun shining on the gathered crowd and the air filled with possibility, Edward and Clara's legacy of hope and human connection was not just a story but a living reality, one that would inspire courage, generosity, and resilience for years to come, proving that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to extraordinary endings.